I joined Automattic, a company which was essentially 43% plus of the internet. And it's not one that you really even hear of, right? So it's definitely fascinating.
Today's guest is Amandeep Shergill, Director of Talent Acquisition at Automattic, the company behind WordPress.com, WooCommerce, Tumblr, WordPress VIP, and more. Amandeep is an experienced global recruitment leader, well-versed in all areas of recruitment, from highly tactical execution to long-term strategy.
Company of, what are we now, about 1,500 people in 95 countries across the world. And our leadership structure is interesting. We don't call our leaders managers, we call them leads. It's a very fluid organization, so people can move in and out of leadership roles. And it's not kind of seen as a promotion or demotion. It's just seen as a growth journey. And we also have a coaching program available to every single person at Automattic, whether you're a leader or not.
Where are the challenges and the pinch points when people move up through the ranks into leads and lead of leads?
What I call the challenge of zooming in and zooming out. That's a challenge of middle leadership. For us, that's a really big pinch point right now.
Hello, Amandeep. Welcome to The Power Between.
Thanks for having me, Roddy. It's a great podcast, one I've been listening to, and I appreciate you having me on as a guest.
Well, I'm very excited to have you on the show too, Amandeep. Well, on several counts. You're a talent acquisition director, and we haven't had one of those on the show before. So you bring a different perspective and a particular focus and sort of hands-on insight into the world of mid-level management and the challenges and costs, quite frankly, of finding the right people in a world of constant change and probably constant churn too. And I know we're going to speak a little bit about that. But also, you work for one of those companies that no one's ever heard of outside of its sector, but we all know the products you build. So you work for Automattic, which is, I've recently learnt, the business behind WordPress, WooCommerce, Simple Note, VaultPress, Tumblr, and lots more. Basically, pretty much all the web platforms and apps we all use every day. So tell me, how did you get into this role and what was your journey to get there?
It's fascinating. Definitely, when I first joined, it was the same thing. A company which I was essentially 43% plus of the internet. And, it's not one that you really even hear of, right? So it's definitely fascinating. So my background, I started my career in recruitment, and I started actually in agency side and moved in-house later. And it's quite an interesting take because I've worked across a number of different technology businesses from the blockchain space, the fintech space, and then I joined Automattic specifically because it's a combination of a lot of different things that I've done, but it's a profitable business, but it's also one that aims to do some social good. And, we'll talk about the democratization of the open web. That's kind of a core ethos behind Automattic and what we try to achieve. And that's one of the most fascinating things, which I try to embed in everything that I do every single day. That's kind of really, really fascinating. Beyond that, it's the actual working model. It's a distributed company, not just remote. So it's kind of that next step on is the way that I look at that. And I've encountered similar types of working models when I was at Consensus, but this is different again. A company of, what are we now? About 1,500 people in 94, 95 countries across the world. And technically one office in New York, which isn't really a working office. So, we don't even have an office. We don't really work from offices, I should say.
It is extraordinary that 1,500 people, as you say, distributed. That is so much the future, really, as we've always had it presented to us. And yet now we're in a period where everyone's been asked to come back into the office and we're being told that helps. But this is built in to the structure of people not working in a sort of open plan space together. And that must bring its own challenges, presumably.
It does. When I was at Consensus, it was never mandated where you work from, but they had offices, they had hubs. And so you could choose to work from home, you could choose to be in the office, you could choose to do anywhere in between, and that was pretty futuristic at the time. And after that, when I was at a company called Lendable, it's a fintech, and the pandemic hit. And so I kind of had some knowledge of how to take a company into that remote space. And so that was a very new concept for that organization, but teaching them how to hire remotely, how to manage talent remotely, do all of the bits and pieces from a remote setting. So joining Automattic was a completely different thing because it's at a different scale and, done globally. And there's definitely a lot of pros to it. We've got kind of what you want to, if you want to call it a follow the sun type of model. So I think the dream or the ideal is that, you have people who are able to do the work, leave really, really good documentation, and then somebody on the other side of the planet could really pick that up seamlessly and continue the work. So there is never downtime, effectively, but done in a very humane and, morally good way. It's not like, you're working like robots and there's never any downtime. There is. It's very, very human in that sense.
But presumably people are working in teams, though. I mean, so when you're handing on to the same person that you hand on to each day or whatever, there's a solid amount of interaction going on there.
Oh yeah, it's not like a free for all where you got 1,500 people all jumping into different things all the time. No, we definitely split out into traditional structure in terms of we have product and engineering teams, we've got sales, marketing, but we're a little bit different in the sense because of the amount of different stuff that we do. So we're set up in like business units, and then we kind of have some centralized teams around that as well. More recently, we've actually increased the amount of centralization and then had parts of those centralized teams focusing in on different areas. Talent is one of the few very, very centralized teams. Like we support the whole of Automattic, whereas like engineering is centralized under one group for efficiency purposes, but they have teams which support WordPress.com and another one which supports Tumblr, another one, et cetera, et cetera. But yes, like they're broken down into squads, just like most engineering organizations, 6-7 people per squad. And then there could be multiple squads per team, per product. And those teams can be geographically dispersed. They don't always have to be in a city. So, one team of 6-7 people, you could have somebody in New York, somebody in LA, somebody in Tokyo, somebody in India. Or you could have all of them spread across North America.
I mean, the reason I sort of mentioned that was because it's important, the relationship between the team members, and that's always the tricky part for remote or in this case distributed work, is trying to maintain those relationships and people who know each other better and understand their quirks and idiosyncrasies, and the way they work, obviously are able to be a little bit more productive or a little bit more forgiving, perhaps, of each other. If you're distributed, that becomes trickier. So the relationship becomes harder if you're not meeting on a regular basis. I would suggest, but what's your view?
Yeah, you're not wrong in that. And I think this is where the hiring practices are incredibly important. And I can touch on that in a second, but we definitely value the human connection. We do meetups, and so like a team will meet up at least once a year in person. It's optional, so now people don't have to travel. We don't mandate it anymore. We used to, but we do encourage people to get together and actually meet people in person on your teams and even on your wider teams. So like some people could be traveling 3-4 times a year. Some people travel a lot more. It just depends on your role. And so, yes, in-person collaboration, getting to know your people, getting to know the people you're working with is still valued in this distributed environment. But we actually rely on written communication a lot more than we do live communication. So we try to keep meetings to a minimum. It depends on the team. Like I'm in a very people-oriented position. So like I end up talking to a lot of people. I have a lot of calls. But when it's like, for example, an engineer, software engineer, they wouldn't necessarily have, they could only have 2 or 3 phone calls a week, or have video calls a week, and to like sync up with the team and do, everything else. Like the daily stand-ups could all be asynchronous and written. Documentation is all done that way. But our hiring process tests that written communication very, very heavily. And so, we don't just do a couple of interviews, then a process finished. It's actually every single role at Automattic consists of having a trial project as part of the hiring process.
Okay.
And the trial project, it differs depending on the role, of course, but it is an actual piece of work. And we're not just evaluating the output of the work, because you're actually given a Slack channel, you're given what we call a P2 page. P2 is similar to like an internal WordPress for Automattic. And so it's where your project work will kind of sit and live, and you can document all your work there, the whole thing, basically. And so you're given access to all of this, plus anything else you need or want access to, whether that is private information or not, like will determine whether that gets shared or not. But you work on that project, and it can be anything from 5 hours to 40 hours, depending on the role. And you do that in your own time. And we are testing the output of the work, but also the way that you collaborate, the way that you communicate, the way that you do the stuff that you're looking for. Are you asking for the right information? Are you asking the right questions? Because a lot of this asynchronous work relies on self-leadership and self-drive. So when we talk about leadership, yes, we have leadership roles, but we also kind of say that every individual contributor is also a leader in their own right. And that's a really big part of the culture and ethos of what we believe anyway, of a distributed company.
No, I mean, I really like that. And yeah, I mean, clearly if you're working, from home on your own, having that self-discipline and that self-starter sort of motivation is critical. And the obvious question, I suppose, is how often do you have people go through those trial projects? They produce a good piece of work at the end, in as much as the output, but the process doesn't meet your requirements. How sort of brutal are you about that process element?
It's probably the most common reason somebody won't pass a trial. So the output is probably we'll generally already know if somebody's going to be able to do the job or not through the previous interviews. And the trial is number one, a confirmation that they can do that. And so generally we're pretty good on that. But more often than not, the reason somebody will not pass a trial project or a trial process at Automattic is because of those other reasons, what we would call the softer skills, if you want to call it that. Whether it's written or verbal communication, whether it's, the way that you communicate and collaborate, whether it's, the way that you've approached the trial, the planning process of it. Like it could be a number of different reasons depending on the actual role itself.
That must make such a difference. I mean, clearly in the, the unusual structure that you have at Automattic, but what always sort of puzzles me about recruitment in most organizations is they spend this massive amount of time trying to identify people who can do the work in terms of having the technical ability. And as you say, essentially by the time you've got into the interview, then you've probably already filtered out that or worked out to a pretty high percentage that they're going to be able to do that because of their training, their background, whatever, their experience. And so people are recruited on the soft skills, the super skills. But the difference is, I suppose, that in Automattic, they're then left to get on with it. Whereas often in an office environment, they then get sort of micromanaged and shadowed over, and they're never actually allowed to do that because the temptation is, if you're in person, to always be hovering over someone. Whereas I suspect that's less likely to happen in a distributed environment.
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, we talked about the pros and cons of distributed working before. And I think one of the pros is the self-drive, self-autonomy, the ability to learn, all that kind of good stuff. But one of the cons is it is a difficult place to be if you're a social person. Like, if you're the kind of person that thrives on that office environment, people buzzing around, water cooler chats, you'd love to have somebody who can just look over your shoulder or you can look over their shoulder. That's not Automattic. It becomes a little bit more challenging, especially if members of your team are in other time zones. You can go up hours where you're the only person online, potentially. We try not to make that happen. And then the other side of it is early talent, earlier career talent, they need more support. And this is where I think office environments work really well for them. And it's a little bit more challenging at Automattic because they don't have access to that support on tap. It's not like they can just go and tap on somebody's shoulder and be like, "Hey, could you just review this? Or could we do some pair programming? Or hey, could you show me how you do this, follow this process?" It exists, but it's a little bit slower, and so it can get a little bit frustrating, or that growth can be a little bit slower, or they're going to pick up mistakes because they're just going to want to move quicker. We tend not to hire as much on the early career side of things. It tends to be mid, seniors, and above. And our leadership structure is interesting because we don't call our leaders managers, we call them leads. And then the next layer up I'll call lead of leads or leads of leads. And so, it kind of distributes upwards that way, but they're not designed to be blockers or layers for the layers' sake. There's the way that the layers work at Automattic is they're designed to create efficiency, but we try to keep things as flat as possible in reality. So, for example, I have a lead and they have a lead, and then that goes up into the CEO. But if I needed to, I could go and talk to Matt, who's our CEO, like tomorrow or today if I really wanted to, and nobody's going to bat an eyelid. Like my lead isn't going to be like, hey, why did you go and talk to Matt? It's kind of encouraged. It's actually encouraged because he's an incredible leader, and he wants to be very accessible and very open. And so he hates
where's
it
he based? Is he in the States?
he's in the States, but he travels a lot. So he's originally from Texas, but I think he officially lives in California, San Francisco, but he's always on the road. So, he's in Europe, he's in Asia, he's everywhere all the time. But he, asynchronously, he is very, very accessible and is very open, and actively dislikes it when people say, hey, you're the CEO, I can't chat to you. He's like, well, why not? But
yeah, well, I suppose in the interesting thing, you can't have an open door policy if you're not in an office because you've got no door to leave open. But so that metaphorically, he's got a very open door, though. So drilling down on this again, our focus around mid-level leaders, and so you've got these leads and leads of leads. Do you give them any specific training or development to when they go into those roles, or is the sort of culture supposed to imbue them with the right skills in any case?
it's a great question. So yes and yes is what I would say. I mean, a lot of our leads actually are promoted from within. So a lot of people will be hired as individual contributors, and then they're promoted up. I say promoted; it's the wrong word. They kind of choose to move up into a lead role. It's a very fluid organization, so people can move in and out of leadership roles, and it's not kind of seen as a promotion or demotion. It's just seen as a growth journey because some people may do that for specific purposes. Maybe there's just something they want to learn in that field. And maybe then they want to actually learn about a different domain sector. And that doesn't mean that they're going backwards. It just means that they're actually adding to their skill set. So not like a promotion aspect tied to being a lead or not being a lead at Automattic. But we do have a leadership course. And even if you're an experienced leader coming into Automattic, you are expected to go through this course. And so it's done on two different levels. One is for lead level and the other one is for lead of leads. It's called Reboot, and we've partnered with an external company who helped develop this specifically for us, and they run these programs for us as well. But it's very much tailored towards our culture, our environment, the way that we operate, and it gives everybody that kind of toolkit around how we operate. So whether you're a first-time leader and you need to get to the grips of like, how do I handle conflict with the team? Or, how do I handle difficult conversations? All of that is part of this, all the way through to more complex things. Whether it is creating specific frameworks around how your team works together in a specific way. If it's your team going through norming, storming, forming phases, they can help you with all of those elements. And then the lead of leads one is kind of the next step of that. It's the part two, in essence, and digs deeper into some of these areas and just it goes into more complexity. I've been through both, and they're very strong programs. Very, very cool.
And are they all online too then? Are they or is some of that in person?
You get a choice. So they are held in person. People can travel and actually attend them. They're held in different places around the world. Not in our offices because we don't have any, but like we'll create like a co-working space and people will attend. They are also done virtually. So when I did them, they were both virtually. I attended both virtually. Beyond that, we don't actually have set budgets for learning and development for folks. So like people can spend what they want to spend within reason, on learning and development. So, books, there is no real limit. If they want to do online courses, they want to do X, Y, Z, like it's all available to them. But beyond that, we also have an internal learn team, and they create their own content for automaticians. So like helping them to grow in different areas. This could be for leadership, it could be for non-leadership. And we also have a coaching program available to every single person at Automattic, whether you're a leader or not. And that's an external executive coach in essence. We use a platform for it now, but when we didn't always. And so you can actually just go in and select your coach and you're away. Nothing to pay, nothing to expense. It's just taken care of.
And that's at whatever level you are on the
correct.
Same access. That's quite a perk, actually.
It's a very good perk. One I've taken very good advantage of. Like it's invaluable in my opinion.
I mean, I've always said, coaching is essentially the gold standard of leadership development because it's one-on-one, isn't it? I mean, so you're getting very personalized advice and support. How amazing! And is that? I mean, that shows a sort of a real commitment to developing people through those? I mean, do you have good retention figures?
I'd say so. Even at it's different today versus when I first joined. But even then, the retention figures haven't changed dramatically. Retention in the tech sector it's much higher today just because of instability and the global economy and everything else. But when I first joined, you'd see retention figures in tech companies. You'd see turnover at like 30 odd percent, and we were like 10% or under. And so we have very good we do typically have very good retention rates and tenure rates. So we have some people who've been at Automattic for 15, 18 years. We're a 20-year-old company. So like my lead's been around, I think, for 13, 14 years. I've now been here for coming up to 5 years. It'll be 5 years in May. And in most tech companies, you'll see people shifting around every 2 years, 18 months, I think it's come down to. So
I mean, but it must be very attractive for the digital nomads and people like that to be part of that, and so and that's not necessarily a long-term lifestyle. Do you attract, or do you try and weed out, I suppose, the whatever they'll be, late 20s, early 30s digital nomads who think life, and probably correctly think life, in Cascais or Lisbon or whatever is worth exploring for 18 months.
We don't weed them out. No, I mean, if they're great at what they do, like, it's totally fine. That's what we really concentrate on. If they want to be, and as long as they can take care of their tax burden and tax jurisdictions, like, that's totally fine. Jurisdictions, comply with all that stuff. It's not a problem where you're based with Automattic. You can move around every 3 months, every 6 months, every week. The key thing for us is, are you able to do the job well, and do you care enough about the mission and what we're up to? And if all of that kind of takes care of itself, we don't care about the rest of it necessarily. So what we do care about is, if you're joining Automattic just because it's a distributed model and you can work remotely wherever you want to, and that's your primary reason for joining us, it's not going to fly. And so I always say to every person I talk to, I always ask them, and well, I don't need them to have read it, but I do kind of share the link to the creed, which is on our website, and that really dictates how we operate day to day. Every company has values, but we opt to have a creed instead of values. And the creed was written by automaticians, and it's a living thing. It's not something which has been written and forgotten about. Like, it constantly gets evolved. And it is a very, very good set of, whatever you want to call it, like sentences or feelings about how life at Automattic is. The first one is, never stop learning. And there's another one in there, which is around, I value open source more than money. It's like, we're not just after a cash grab, we care about what our actual impact on the world. And so, that's kind of, these are the things which we really concentrate on when we're hiring versus, is this person digital nomad? Like, we don't really care.
No, fair enough. But in fact, if they're embodying the elements of the creed, and we should put a link up to what the creed is in the notes. So, I mean, it's publicly on the website, presumably. Is it?
Absolutely, yes.
That if they're embodying those, then presumably that suggests to me that they're acquiring and living the values that probably good leadership enables in any case. So where are the challenges? I mean, I know you're on the recruitment side rather than necessarily the learning side, but where are the challenges and the pinch points perhaps then in when people move up through the ranks into leads and lead of leads?
Fascinating question. And I think it depends on which area of the business you look at, but I'll talk you through a couple of them. So when you have new leadership and they're entering into quite complex, large problem spaces, they're maybe encountering things for the very first time. And there's a lot of learning that comes with that. That's not a problem, but it can potentially, at some points anyway, slow down the way the business can perform. And so when we're in the markets like we are today, when everything is so tight and so lean, do you always have the time and the space to allow people to have that space to learn and to get into those areas? And so you kind of enter this realm of, or this way up of, do we allow new leaders or do we want to have experienced leaders? And then it kind of takes you into the next problem space of when you're hiring external leadership into a place like Automattic, and every place is going to be unique, so every person out there is going to have their own version or flavor of this, but it's, how do you hire a leader that's going to be able to very quickly embed into this space? For us, it's a very complex area because we have so many different parts of Automattic, but we operate like a conglomerate of startups. And so you need people who have got scale, for example, WordPress.com, millions of users a day. And, when we're talking about our enterprise SaaS business, you're talking about, millions of dollars of SaaS revenue. We're looking at over $100 million of SaaS revenue and like multiples of that from a growth perspective. Yet we need people who can be hands-on and operate very much like they're in a startup environment. And so wearing multiple hats and having that kind of ability to zoom in and out from a leadership perspective is also quite unique. And that comes with its own set of challenges. For us, that's a really big pinch point right now. Combining that with the domain expertise or like people who are passionate about democratizing the web, people who understand the WordPress ecosystem or stuff like this, is combining all of those things into one. That's where things get very, very tricky from a leadership standpoint, especially.
I mean, that really resonates with me. I mean, I'm particularly this bit about trying to create structured space for reflection. I mean, 'cause a big part of being good at leadership is having that self-awareness about what your own leadership practice is like. And if you don't have those reflective spaces and the opportunity to discuss it, then that becomes really difficult to do that. And I imagine, and if you're working on your own in an environment such as Automattic offers you, then that becomes even more complicated. So putting in place those structured spaces, is that something that is sort of actively sought?
100%. We have more structured spaces for conversations, not just for leadership, for everything, than any company I've seen. We're a company of, I think, 1,500 people, but we have somewhere in the region of 5,000 Slack channels because they set up their spaces for whatever it is, whether it's to talk about football or knitting or leadership. Those spaces exist. To have open conversations, Slack is one. The other one is we have a dedicated, and it's open to everybody at Automattic, but a leadership P2. I mentioned P2 is like our internal WordPress. So you can blog and write about whatever you want in there. And so leaders are sharing whatever they want. You see experienced leaders sharing tidbits of information which they've gathered throughout the years, whether it's external or internal. And then you see brand new leaders who kind of go in and they're like, a reflection of my first 3 months as a lead. And, you're seeing all sorts of stuff which kind of comes up in there. And it's fascinating to see how people come together and support each other no matter what the journey is. And you'll see experienced leaders who are like, I've never experienced this before because it's unique to the Automattic world. And you'll have new leaders who have been in Automattic maybe for 5-10 years who can support them through that journey as well. And so you kind of see this beautiful kind of paradox or like melting pot of leadership.
I mean, I wonder, is the fact that people are working in isolation, in physical isolation, but not communication isolation, I wonder if that allows them to be more transparent and honest than if you're sitting in a group. I don't know. I'm riffing on the psychology of it, which it suggests to me that there might be a possibility of that.
Possibly, who knows? I'm no psychologist. I've got a psychologist on my team, who works with me in the talent function. Maybe I should bring her on and she can.
You should run it past her. But I mean, in terms of, are you bringing people in as leads then, or? Well, I know. Okay, well, what's the proportion of people who come in as leads versus those who get promoted up internally?
It varies because I think it also depends on the team and even on the department, right? So within happiness, which is a big chunk of the company, happiness is tech support, to keep it simple. A lot of that is internal promotion rather than brought in from external. But when we're talking about building new capability, sometimes we do have, like a lot of that time we are kind of bringing that in externally because we just don't have that internal expertise to do that. Especially when you're talking about C-suite leadership in fast growth areas. So that's kind of an area where we do have to do a lot of external hiring. It does vary, as I said. So yeah, we are hiring a lot of leaders. Say a lot, it kind of depends on the organization, but we are hiring quite a few leaders, is what I would say. And even senior individual contributors who could potentially become leaders. Like we're kind of building out this pipeline of succession planning, if you want to call it this too.
I mean, you've been seeing very fast growth too, presumably. I mean, and it presumably depends on which application or business unit it is at any particular time. But that frequently brings its own challenges again around that, because you're acquiring people. I mean, I'm still fascinated by this whole idea of being able to lead people that you're not in physical presence with. If you're adding people to a team too on a constant basis, that's an extraordinary challenge. So, I mean, is that covered in the reboot and training elements?
The part of that kind of forming, norming, storming, that whole team growth journey depends on, like, is it a brand new team? Is it an existing team? Is it one going through change? Like, some of that is covered within reboot. Like, personally, when I first joined Automattic, I saw, talent was very fragmented. So, every team, recruitment was effectively like the Wild West. Everybody could do what they wanted to do. And my first challenge was to kind of bring engineering hiring together and to make it into something which would scale. I think the most we had hired in a year was about 100 people. And I joined in May of 2021, and we had hired 30 engineers by that point. And I was told we need to hire a minimum of 200 engineers by the end of the calendar year. We had 2 technical recruiters and a specialist. And so I was like, okay. Oh, and by the way, we also had to reduce agency spend. So I was like, okay, cool, that's fine. Let's get to it. And we did it. We got to 245 engineering hires by the end of that calendar year. We scaled up a recruiting function. I started to kind of pull in the different other different parts of recruiting, so design and go to market and everything else. And we eventually had a centralized recruiting function, and we did have to scale that up. I think within the first 18 months of me joining, we hired something like 700 or 800 people. Now, that's a lot of growth. I think we were 1,400 people, about 1,300 people, and we scaled up to 2,200. Now, obviously, we've had to reduce, and we've now stabilized. And I think now we're hiring about 150 a year. So I've seen the scale. I've seen the other side of things, and I've seen it kind of stabilize out now. And it's interesting to see that. Like, with the recruiting function at one point, because I kind of pulled in so many different things, was about 25 people. Some of that was growth, some of that was acquisition, internal acquisition, some of it was the whole rest of it. And yeah, like I've experienced that, and a lot of those people, I didn't even meet in person. And some of those, obviously, some of the people who are in the team now I've met multiple times. They've been around for a few years now, but some of those folks I never even met once in person. And so yeah, it's an interesting one, and it works.
But
I think,
when
this
it's
environment is mixed.
exploding like that, I mean that's an enormous number of transactions apart from anything else. But they're transactions that all involve people, and you need to understand the person. It's not as if you're just buying another unit off a shelf. So each one's individual in its nature, and then they're in a team which may only, well, guessing here, but if they join a team and they're the 5th person of the team or the 4th person of the team, and then 3 weeks later there's the 5th person, the 6th person, then that dynamic's changing all the time too. So I mean that makes it a really sort of dynamic on the one side, but also sort of unsettling on the other. And if you're in a lead role for that, that's exhausting apart from anything else. I mean, I suppose one of my the points I always make is that the leadership role is hard work, and when you're in that kind of flow, it's really hard work.
What I call the challenge of zooming in and zooming out. That's a challenge of middle leadership who are especially going through scale. But middle leadership have to they have to be able to kind of zoom out into, their leadership strategy level kind of conversations and talk, and being able to translate that down to their level, and then being able to translate that down to their team, right? So zooming and zooming out. And I think that's when you're going through change, that zooming in, zooming out phase is it's evolving very, very rapidly. So being able to do that at pace and at scale with the level of agility of a startup or a company like Automattic, it's very, very challenging. And that's not something you're taught. That's not something Reboot could teach you, or many other people can teach you. It's something which you think, there's part of it which is ingrained in a human, and the other part is something which you just have to learn very, very quickly.
I suppose that's where the coaching part comes in as a sort of pretty powerful sort of support there, and you've got someone at your shoulder you can turn to. I mean, is the coaching widely used?
Yes. Yeah. A lot of people use the coaching. It's adopted quite widely. And, the number of sessions which are, I guess, pre-approved, if you want to call it this, not very many people exceed that number. And even when you are kind of getting close to it, you can always contact HR and they'll say yay or nay. But more than likely it's a yay to kind of having some more sessions if you need them. But it's very generous, and like everybody gets the same amount. But the coaching is invaluable for sure.
You're using a sort of a platform like BetterUp or one of these.
Yeah, I think we use Coachello now. And even the coaches which we used to use who weren't on Coachello, like we've either onboarded them on or like we worked it out in one way, shape, or form. But we use Coachello just because it's just more streamlined. It's easy to manage everything.
From a recruitment point of view, it is a pretty unique environment, and the EVP, the employee value proposition, sounds pretty attractive to those people who are looking for that kind of thing. So it is, from your point of view, do you find a constant stream of good applicants? I mean, obviously it's going to vary for role and expertise and whatever, but I suppose at this stage in the economic cycle where there are plenty of people looking for jobs in any case, but
how long do we have? This is a whole topic in itself, so I'll try and condense it very, very quickly, but we get inundated with, we have a lot of applications, a lot of people who are interested in working at Automattic. However, there's a lot of nuance within that because there's also a lot of AI applications now. So there's some of those applications which are not genuine, they're fake, they're not real people. The bots which are applying.
What's the purpose behind that?
Well, there's a combination of things. You get bad actors. So you do get some potential agents from, specific areas who are trying to infiltrate organizations. Like, some of that is happening. Some of it is, this is speculation. It's not like, this is out there as well, right? But there's also some people who are like trying to do 2 jobs and, all the rest of it. And they think they can use AI to kind of do 2 jobs and all sorts of other stuff. And then there's other people who are just like, they're trying to embellish what they actually are able to do, right? So the CV or like the capabilities. And so you get a lot of fake applications. You get a lot of AI generated applications, and you can very, very easily see that these days. The answers are all the same, CVs look the same, etc., etc. And you do question a lot of that. And then you get a lot of people who are interested in working at Automattic, but we just don't have the right role for them. And they're trying to shoehorn themselves into roles out there, but it doesn't always work. And so we're having to weed through a lot of that. And at the same time, every tech company, every company I think out there is in the same boat, but we're having a broader set of requirements for every role. And so we're looking for a more unique profile for every position that we have open today versus what we did 4 years ago. And so it's getting even more difficult to find the right person, even though there's more of them out there. And so we do rely a lot on going out and so what we call sourcing, but headhunting effectively. So we do a lot of that versus relying on our inbound applications.
Yeah, no, I can imagine it's a pretty fully on. In terms, I mean, we spoke earlier, and the tech sector is well known for its churn, and you were saying that your retention rates and your tenure rates too are low. But do you think the model helps in reducing that churn?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's not that many companies who are genuinely as distributed as we are and as human centric as Automattic are. We have the benefits are extremely strong for people around the world. We have pay parity effectively, right? So we don't discriminate based on location. We don't say, hey, if you're in the US, you're going to get paid 3 times more than if you're based in Southeast Asia or Vietnam, for example, right? Like we say, this is what the range is. This is where you're going to get paid. It's very, very simple.
So there's some people living some pretty comfortable lives in Southeast Asia then, are there?
And it's not just Southeast Asia, but all over the world, right? And so 90 odd countries around the world. But yeah, there's that. We have unlimited paid vacation. We call it AFK because it counts for everything, but vacation is unlimited. Every 5 years, there's a 3-month paid sabbatical, 6 months paid parental leave. There's a lot of this is on top of the coaching benefits, on top of stipends for if you're working from home, you get like your whole setup paid for effectively within reason again. But there's a lot. It's very, very human centric. It's not a kind of company which is hire and fire or designed for high churn. Matt doesn't believe in that. He's very, very active about using very human terminology, number one, internally. And secondly, he cares. He's like, for example, when I was at previous companies, if you refer somebody in successfully, you get a cash bonus for that. And here we do a charity contribution. And a lot of people get, they can challenge it a little bit. And Matt's like, look, if you bring people in who are really good, they're going to last here for 7, 8, 9, 10 years. They're going to have a profound impact on this organization. And so, what's a one-time bonus going to do for you? If you're referring a lot of people in successfully, we can have a chat about that as part of your performance review, your salary review, give you more salary, or give you something else. Like, let's talk about that in a more meaningful way instead of cash bonus. So it's a lot more meaningful, a lot more human.
I mean, a lot of that chimes so much with this idea of corporate stewardship and the organization as a community, and that collective sense of well-being and promotion, so that people in the organization have adopted the mindset where they get intrinsic value from the fact that they're raising all the boats. What they're doing is better for the organization, and if it's better for the organization, then it's going to be better for them, rather than that very individualistic one, which is winner takes all. That is extremely rare to be able to achieve. So I tip my hat absolutely to you. Where do you think, we've only got a few minutes left, but where do you think that ethos has come from? Is Matt the founder, or so he's been there, right?
Yeah, he's the founder and CEO. He was the co-founder of WordPress as an open source project as well. He cares very, very deeply about open source, as does pretty much everybody at Automattic. And that's where it really comes from.
Open source is a community concept, really, isn't it?
There you go. That's it. That's exactly it. And one of the lines in the creed is, I know that open source is one of the most powerful ideas of our generation. And, he's a staunch protector of open source and, the ideals that come behind that. So from that perspective, that's the origins of it. And that, that's where it comes from. And, he's keeping that alive. That's part of the kind of DNA of Automattic for sure.
Well, strength to his arm, because it's not necessarily the zeitgeist of the moment, is it, that approach? But hopefully, like all these things, the more flexible and collective approaches eventually win through. Amandeep, thank you so much. It's been fascinating to get that insight and hear your experiences. Really appreciative of that. Amandeep Shergill, thank you very much indeed.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on board.